Thank you, Marco, for the very nice introduction. Well, actually, this is the first slide. As Marco kindly said, my name is Maurizio Totta. In my previous life, I was the CEO of Europe's largest shopping mall. So I have some experience in large and scalable projects. And once the shopping mall was sold, just 4 months before Lehman went bust, I decided to apply my know-how and also my money to projects that make the world a better place. So after many years of looking, I found this possibility of investing my money, ASF, Amazon Sustainable Forestry. As you can see from this time-lapse photography, this is how progress looks in an average Amazon setting. In 1984, there is jungle. One road is cut through the jungle, then transversus roads are cut. The parcels are allocated to different farmers. And to make a living, they cut down the forest, they put some cows, and this is progress on the Brazilian side. However, there is hope. And hope has always to be associated with profit, with income for the local population, otherwise it doesn't work. So this is a forest that was owned by a friend of us, and please note that the time scale is exactly the same. So 1984 to 2016. And the progress around his property is exactly the same. However, his property stays forest. But he was able to keep it a forest because he was engaged in sustainable forest. So it seems paradox to cut trees to protect the forest. But this is how it works. So for me, just getting a return on my money, even if I'm an impact investor, a return first impact investor, that's not enough. I want to get more out of my money. And so I think with our operation with ASF, we are achieving this in a very good way, because the first goal is to protect the forest. By using it in a sustainable way, we are protecting the forest and it stays as a forest. By avoiding this tragic deforestation, which usually entails the burning of the trees once they're cut, we're also protecting the climate to the tune of 500 tons per every hectare, because this is how much carbon is stored in the forest. And last but not least, we couldn't achieve this without getting the buy-in of the local population by creating a sustainable income, by creating jobs, and of course the politicians, they are in favor of us. I spoke personally with the governor of the state of Acre, which is of the same party as Bolsonaro, who said, I want to support you, because you are the largest legal employer in forestry in our state. You're the largest exporter. And last but not least, we also get quite a decent return for the investor, at least double digits on an IRR basis. So how do you do this? So we have a combination of both protecting the existing forest as it is and creating a commercially viable, different kind of forest of precious hardwood trees like teak, mahogany. And these trees provide additional employment because, of course, it's much more labor intensive to raise the small trees in the nursery, plant them, take care of them. And you can also get a much better return because these are commercially very valuable species. And by doing so, we are creating all the conditions to preserve the forest cover on 100% of the properties. So the detailed operation, so you have on one side sustainable harvesting. Sustainable means that you never cut more than what grows back, which in our case means you go into the forest during the so-called dry season, dry because it rains less than during the wet season, where it rains much more, and you barely can move in the forest. So during the first time that you go in, you cut up to 10% of the volume that exists in that forest by selecting just the oldest and biggest trees, which you cut before they die. And by the way, if the trees die while in the forest, if you don't cut them, they release the CO2 that they stored by decomposing and getting back to the atmosphere. So all this talk about the Amazon being the lung of the planet is actually not true. An old-growth forest is a fantastic carbon sink, but is actually carbon neutral. It doesn't absorb any CO2 more than it releases through decomposition and through the release of CO2 of the trees that have died. So by doing so, we keep the forest with its biodiversity, with all the species of trees like they are, because you selectively just cut certain trees. And you do so during those 5 months of the dry season, and then for 24.5 months, nothing happens in that forest. So if any, you just selectively cut a few trees, and if any animals are disturbed, they just move to another side of the forest, and then they come back. On the other side, on 20% of the surface, we transform the forest by actively planting species that we want there, like teak, mahogany. These are tropical species, perfectly adapted to the environment. They grow very fast, they produce a very valuable wood, and in order to have them grow straight and tall, you start by planting 1,600 trees at the beginning. Then at 7 years, you cut 800 trees. Then at 10 years, you cut a further 400 trees, and then you reduce this to an amount where you have just a final harvesting of 360 trees in year 21. And these are massive trees, so you get to a return of about 300, 350 cubic meters, and each cubic meter of that wood is worth about $200, $250. Prices of today. In 21 years, it will be higher. So this is how it works in one of our properties. So you can see the dark green is the forest that will be kept in its state, where you just selectively take out the single big trees. And then for 25 years, nothing happens there. The dark blues are the areas that are, in Portuguese, they're called áreas de proteção permanente, permanently protected areas. That's the areas with highest biodiversity along the creeks, along the rivers, where you're not allowed to touch anything in order to protect these areas where the highest biodiversity between land and water is concentrated. And then the light green are the areas that are actually transformed into these high-value, fast-growing hardwood forests. And these are directly on the road, so not only are they easily accessible, because there you harvest in a much more frequent, time scale, but also you protect the other forest, which is then farther away from the road. So just to give you some ideas on why we're doing this. So I own forests in Argentina, I own forests in Austria, so the returns are about 11% in Argentina, 1% in Austria. And if you were doing sustainable forestry, only sustainable forestry, you would earn about 4 to 5% return, which is nice, better than Europe, not quite as the eucalyptus I have in Argentina. But the interesting thing is, just on the 20% that we transform into the high-value hardwood forest, please look at the, I don't know if the laser is working. No, it's not. So please look at the lines in bold. So the total investment to buy and to do this transformation on the 16,000 hectares is less than $12 million. So it's slightly more than $700 per hectare. So very low prices, especially compared with Europe, even much lower than Argentina, for instance. But if you look at the yearly return from the teak reforestation, once you get to the second teak thinning, the third teak thinning, or even the final harvesting, you're talking about 5, 7, or even 28 millions a year for 10 years, because these are just 320 hectare lots. So to me, this is even better exemplified. You see the volumes. The dark green are the volumes of the sustainable harvesting. The light greens are the volume of the teak thinning and teak reforestation. But if you look at the projected free cash flow, it's a massive difference, which means the whole investment to buy the whole property is paid back from the second thinning in year 11 and 12, perhaps even something in year 13, and then it's just profit. Year on, and then you have very nice returns. We already control something like 1.1 million hectares in the Brazilian Amazon, which could seem a lot of land because that corresponds to the surface of 25% of Switzerland. However, it's only 0.25% of the Amazon. So there is plenty of space to expand that. And that's why any amount of private money is always limited. So we're looking for partners to go with us to buy additional land. I have some big projects like a big solar farm in Portugal. If I built it now or in 10 years, the land wouldn't have been destroyed. But as you saw in the first slide, we are fighting a race against time. And we have a way of protecting this by convincing the local people and the investor that it's actually a good business to keep the forest alive. So the forest is worth more alive than dead. And this is the essence, because just by doing philanthropy or by saying, no, you don't have to cut the forest and so on, that doesn't work. You have first to put people, the local stakeholders, you have to put them in the middle of the discourse. You have to give them an alternative. And it's not only the stakeholders. You can see some other stakeholders that are walking in one of our managed forests. So you see him, because usually the males are a bit, the males of this nice cat species are a bit bigger than the females. And he sometimes looks back, she doesn't even bother. And our forestry workers are just driving slowly along one of those roads. So if you have the apex predator in that environment, in that biosphere, which is still quite happy in that environment, then the whole nature conservancy, the environmental impact, the biodiversity impact seems to work. So, yeah, that's
amazing.
the usual disclaimer, and yeah, and that's the company.
Thank you.
Forgive me, 10 minutes.
As they say, pictures speak more than words. You have proven that sustainable forestry is possible.